I want to welcome to the show Dr. Jessica Peck. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today, Melissa.
Normally I'm excited for conversations. I feel like this conversation is just a hard one, but a necessary one, talking about just the news and what our kids are going through, what parents are going through. It's just devastating to have shooting after shooting after shooting and for our kids to feel unsafe. I know my daughter personally, like, she's so afraid of shootings. She's now like, where are my exits? Like, she goes into a building, she's aware of like what exits are safe, like what doors are locked, what doors are unlocked. And so it's hard for all of us. And I'm navigating it through in my sessions with clients. I'm sure you're seeing this. What are you seeing in your practice with your patients?
Oh, I feel your pain, Melissa. As a pediatric nurse practitioner, I see this and being responsible in leadership forums and having to talk about this again, it's exquisitely painful. As a mom, I'm having those same kind of conversations you are. I mean, my son came home looking and I saw his Amazon search history is bulletproof backpacks. I mean, this is the
Wow.
reality that we have, and they're talking very normally about lockdown drills and how the teachers are a little bit different and how some of them have bought things off Amazon that are extra that aren't provided by the school and some haven't, and how they feel about that. I mean, it's heartbreaking. And I think, for me, especially, as a pediatric nurse practitioner, having been a nurse leader, I'm acutely aware of school shootings and violence. And it's always horrible. You can't imagine anything worse than that now familiar scene that we see on the media where anxious parents are waiting outside and you see police. I mean, oh, I get goosebumps and
Hmm.
chills just even thinking about it. But for me, my own community experienced a school shooting, Santa Fe, Texas, and then of
Mm.
course Uvalde last year, which is not too far from me. And somehow, when you see people it becomes all the more horrifying. And, I was a first responder in the community regional hospital the day of the Santa Fe shooting. And I remember getting calls about victims coming in, and I was thinking, I was so confused because we're not a level one trauma center. And I was thinking, why
Hmm.
are they calling us? And then it hit me, and I thought, the level one trauma centers are at capacity. So
Mm.
that's why they're sending them here. So I think that this is just a situation that breaks the hearts of parents across the world, and it strikes fear in our hearts. That's really the main thing that we need to talk about is how do we manage this fear that, that this will happen. And it's really hard to shake that anxiety. I feel that on a personal level.
Hmm. As you're talking with patients, parents, and just in your own community, what do you advise parents to do to help manage their own levels of anxiety? Because if we ourselves are riddled with fear, if we can't manage our own emotions, it's going to be really difficult to help our kids manage their emotions.
I think the first thing that we have to do is just acknowledge that it's there and acknowledge that we're thinking about it and acknowledge that it's making us anxious. Sometimes we don't even think about it. Like this particular shooting that happened last week in Nashville, it is on the mind of every parent. But have we stopped to really give that grace and space in our hearts and minds and to say, you know what? This is really bothering me,
Hmm.
because subconsciously, it impacts our actions. We can find ourselves more irritable, and more less patience. We're impatient, and we don't even recognize that it's spilling over into our actions. And our kids are really good, I think, at taking our barometer and calling us out on that. And so we just need to stop and pause and just say, you know what, I'm feeling really anxious about that. That really hurt me. I know it hurt you too. And it's okay to be sad about that. So I think
Hmm.
just acknowledging it first is really important. And then just taking time to grieve and to seek spiritual support. And we know, Melissa, you and I both know that the things that we can do to promote our own mental health are very simple, but not easy. So
Right.
making sure that we're getting rest, that we're taking care of our bodies, that we're having good nutrition, we're taking the time to feed ourselves, that we're minimizing our screen time. I mean, all of those things play into the anxiety related to this. But it's very simple, but not easy. But most of the time, if we can just take some mindfulness, stop, have a few therapeutic cleansing conversations with support people around us, and look at our lives and think, what do we need to do to improve our own mental health? For most people, that's going to be enough.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you added that piece about processing with safe people. I think we have
Yes.
to be so careful that we don't surround ourselves with other like super duper fearful people. But that allows us to process our emotions. I know for my husband and I, we just went for a walk and I processed my anger with him, my sadness, and he did the same. And that felt good just to know that like I'm not the only one. Obviously, I know that I'm not, you know that you're not. But when it's your own experience, it can feel like I don't even know what to do with all this emotion.
That's a really good point, and it brings up a phenomenon called trauma dumping, which our
Mm,
kids experience online. And trauma dumping is basically when you experience someone else's trauma without any advance warning or your consent. So this is how
mm,
this plays out for our kids. They get on social media and they see kids ranting about school shootings. They see kids who have been there, who have experienced it, and their brain is just washed and flooded with these trauma experiences that they are not equipped to deal with. And they think that it's a good thing. They think that they're being compassionate or they're just being informed, but they have to recognize the limitations of their own brain and, frankly, ours too as adults. So we need to recognize when someone is sharing trauma with us and maybe it's too much detail or it's just too much. You just can't process anymore. I know my husband has a much, much lower threshold than I do. I can take a lot more than he can. He hears one word and he's just like crying and just so heartbroken. And we need
mhm,
to honor our own trauma thresholds and say something like, you know what, this is really too much for me. I'm going to ask to step away from this conversation. We need to do that. We need to empower our kids to do that.
mhm. I think so much of that has to do with our online consumption.
Yes.
I know for me, I have to like not go in the deep dive of like looking through people's threads. I don't know why I do that, but I'll do that. And it's just like, this is not helpful for me.
Yeah, you know what's the horrible thing? You know why you do that, Melissa? Because the best psychologists in the world are employed by those social media platforms whose whole life's work is to produce an algorithm that's going to make you do that. That's not a
Mm.
fair fight. That is not a fair
Yeah.
fight.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up, just how social media does enter in and how it influences our own headspace and heart space. So one thing I've been curious about with this, just personally, and I've seen this with clients I work with, is just like how much should we be telling our kids about the school shooting? I know with this latest one, my daughter didn't bring it up. I didn't bring it up. I'm like, I don't know if they're talking about it. Like, I didn't even know how to gauge it because she's so afraid. And so what can we do in age appropriate ways? Like I know there's a difference between like an elementary school kid and like middle school, high school, but in a couple of age appropriate ways, like how can we be talking to our kids about current events?
Such a great question. So, for this, I have 4 questions that I have parents guide through to talk with their kids and
Mm-hmm.
initiate conversation. Because of social media, even if your kid is not on it, the likelihood is someone in their classes, and I'm talking like starting age 8, 9, 10, where they're talking about it at home. So, when my kids come home from school, the first question I ask them is, "How are you feeling about what happened today?" That's
Mm-hmm.
usually what I say, and I don't usually tell them what happened. If they say, "What happened?" then I know, okay, they don't know, and then I
Mm-hmm.
can just kind of gauge that conversation, tell them in a developmentally appropriate way. There, was a shooting at a school today. Those things happen. If you have any questions about it, let me know. I know those things are heartbreaking. Or if they know about it already, they can say, "Oh my gosh." That's usually what happens with my teens. They'll say, "Oh, it's awful," and they'll launch into telling me how they feel about it. So then, the second question to ask them is, how do you think this personally impacts you?
Mm.
So then they're talking about, okay, like I don't, it doesn't, maybe they say it doesn't, or maybe they say, I don't feel safe at school, or I'm seeing this on social media, or I want to walk away from the conversation at the lunch table and I don't know how. You can meet them where they are specifically there. The third question is, what can I do to make you feel safe? And
Mm.
I use these same questions. It doesn't matter, what happens, because all of these disasters inherently make our kids feel unsafe. Gen Z feels like the world is unsafe. They're a post 9/11 generation. So they'll tell me that, like, maybe they'll say, there's nothing you can do. Just give me a hug. Or maybe they'll say, can we look at bulletproof backpacks on Amazon? And you can look at that. And the fourth question is, what can you do to make a positive difference? What do you
Mm,
think you can do? And
mhm,
empower them. Maybe that's
mhm,
writing a letter to their legislator. Maybe that's getting a group together at school, to have a facilitated discussion with the help of a teacher. Or, maybe that's reading a book and sharing some information. Kids are amazing. And I'm always impressed at what they can come up with to feel like what they can do. I mean, we see all kinds of activist movements coming from kids. So those are the four questions that I use with my kids, with my patients, with kids who live in a world where any day can just be upended by tragedy.
I think that's so important, especially the last one that you said, to empower them. I feel like so much of the anxiety that I know I feel and others feel, it really is a feeling of powerlessness. Like, I don't know how to create safety in this situation. And I don't know what to do as far as like what I can personally do to make a difference. So I love like bringing kids into that conversation. And I think when we empower them, we're also communicating to them, I believe in you.
Yes.
You're smart, you're capable. Like
Yes.
you are an agent of change. It's not just up to me to provide for you, but you also are able to provide for yourself. And I think you tell me, I think kids as young as 4 can have ideas as far as like what they can do.
Oh, absolutely. Kids are absolutely amazing. And, they may not come up with an idea in the moment. They may say, I
Mhm.
don't know. But they may come back to you the next day or the next week and say, you planted a seed there, basically.
Mhm.
I've been thinking about this and I want to do this. And even something, really small, like a 4-year-old can draw a picture to send to somebody who's sad, I mean, and that really does make you feel good. If you've ever gotten a drawing from a 4-year-old, I mean, that is pretty special. So I think we have to value all of us and kids as God's creations, and just that they have such capacity for action and compassion and love and encouragement.
Mhm. I love these simple questions too, because I'm assuming that you use these questions over and over and over again. I know in counseling, I use like the same questions. And
Yep.
I do that intentionally because as we get used to those questions, and hopefully my clients are asking themselves those questions. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think kids knowing that, okay, mom's going to ask me this next and then this next. And so I think it builds that continuity because unfortunately, like what happened last week, it unfortunately it's likely to happen again. And so I think the more that we can offer our kids that stability and that
Yes.
known space to process their feelings, because it's so hard for a lot of kids to process their emotions, to put names to it, to be able to verbalize it. That just
Yep.
takes a lot of emotional intelligence. And so what are your thoughts on helping kids to be able to even be able to have words? Because some of our kids may be afraid, but don't even know how to communicate their fear.
Oh, for sure. So, naming and claiming emotions is a really helpful therapeutic practice that I engage in all the time. And sometimes we don't even recognize our own emotions. So, stopping and just saying, I can see that you feel really angry. And so many times I'll have one of my kids or one of my patients say, you know what? You're right. I am angry. And just naming that and then being able to process through that is really important. I'll tell you, my husband, even, he has trouble processing his emotions. He's an engineer. Okay.
Mhm.
So I have to throw that out there. But he'll come to me and say, okay, I'm feeling something here. Like,
Mhm.
you need to help figure me out. Like, what am I feeling here? Am I angry? Am I sad? And, usually when we're talking about one of our daughters is about to graduate from high school. So we've had a lot of
A lot
conversations
of
in that.
boohooing, I'm
Yes, but,
sure.
just having that opening of naming the emotion and then being able to walk through that, again, simple but not easy. We know that the number one factor that promotes resilience in kids is meaningful connection to a
Mm,
trusted adult. So
mm,
you may feel like you can't fix their problem. You can't make their school safe. You can't guarantee that they're never going to encounter any danger or tragedy. But knowing that you're a safe person to walk alongside them, Do not
Mm.
discount that. You
Mhm.
matter. You are so important in that, even when you feel inadequate.
Do you mind saying that again? The number one factor in resiliency is a meaningful connection with an adult.
With yes, a meaningful connection with a safe adult.
Uh-huh.
Yes. That there's a lot of research that's been done by a pediatrician named Kenneth Ginsburg. He's written books about it. And we know that when children experience hardship, when they experience stress, it produces a chemical reaction in our brain. You have this cascade of stress hormones and chemicals that come out. It's kind of like if you're in the woods and you run into a bear, your heart
Mhm.
starts pumping and your adrenaline starts pumping and you have that fight or flight response. Well, if you have protective factors, and that just means someone that's walking alongside you that says, I love you, I'm here, you're not alone, we're going to get through this, that turns off that faucet of
Mhm.
chemicals. And if it doesn't turn off, then it's just bathing your brain in a toxic wasteland of these constant surge of chemicals. And that's what builds up to what we call toxic stress. And it starts to literally change the shape of the brain and
Mm.
the way that the brain functions. So we know that the way to intercept that is to have a meaningful connection to a trusted or safe adult and have them walk alongside with you. That's the best thing that kids can do to prevent toxic stress.
That's so powerful. I know you and I are like mental health
Yep.
professionals, and but not every even as such, I am still like lost for words. I feel very fumbly,
Yes.
through parenting. Like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. And I hope I'm saying the right thing. And of course, as a counselor, I think I have like even higher expectations for myself. And my
Yes.
kids could care less about me being a counselor. They want no part of that. They do not want to be a client, which is good. But I love what you're saying, which is that we cannot fix our kids' problems, but we can be safe people for them.
That's
Like you
exactly
and
right.
I we can do that. We can create a safe place for them. And I love Dr. Is it Bessel Vanderkolk? I can never say his name right. He says that trauma isn't just like what happens, but when we go at it alone.
Yes.
That's what truly creates the traumatic experience is when we're alone. And so as parents, we may not be able to know the right words, but I think there's just benefit and value in trying, letting our kids know that they aren't alone, that there's a hug, a cookie,
Yes,
yeah, watching a funny show
absolutely.
with them, cuddling with them. These are things that we can do.
And those are things that are undervalued because we feel like in today's world, we're reading these fancy self-help books and,
Yeah.
and even talking about brain science, like I just did, like it has to be something more complicated than that, but it's not. And I have the same experience as you, Melissa. I mean, I do this every day for a living, but the opening scene of my book, Behind Closed Doors, is a guide to help parents and teens walk through life's toughest situations, life's toughest challenges, is my daughter throwing a book at my head because we were having such unhealthy conflict. So I think part of this journey, and what I say is, I have this platform and wrote this book not because I have it all together, but because I found the courage to say, I don't. And
Hmm.
here's what I've learned along the way. And that's what we have to do, I think, as parents too, is just open up to other parents. We have so much shame and stigma when we feel like we're not doing things well and just say, I don't think I handled this very well. Can you talk me through that? And then going back to our kids and saying, I didn't handle that very well. I want to try again. Let me rewind, have a
Mm-mm.
redo. Like they respect the authenticity that is in that. So if maybe this is your experience as I'm talking to listeners that you try to have a conversation and then all of a sudden you're talking with your teen and you're having a big argument about gun control. Like maybe that's how
Yeah.
that went.
Hmm.
It is perfectly okay to go back and to say, I thought about what you said. I didn't handle myself really well. I'd like to start over and to try to have a conversation again if you're willing to do that, if you'll trust me with that. And then listen, just listen, that I think that's so powerful to do something like that.
Again, it communicates worth and value, a safe place that our kids have a place to be heard, because I think they're feeling unheard, they're feeling unsafe. I love that, not to undervalue the small things, because I think as parents, we do want to do the fancy things to have that reassurance that there's no checkpoint, like to say, yes, you're doing the right thing, check mark, way to go. And so I think sometimes it's just knowing that like we're doing a good enough job
Yeah.
But what about so anxiety is normal. Like we're all feeling anxiety in the situation, but how do we like look for warning signs that maybe this is a little bit beyond just like normal anxiety and this is actually not healthy and our kids aren't functioning well.
That's actually an easy question to answer. So, if it starts impacting your activities of daily living, if you're having trouble doing the things that you need to do during the day, if you can't get out of bed, if you can't get dressed, if you can't go the places that you usually go, if you find yourself avoiding social situations or avoiding relationship conflict and just those things that you need to do, you feel like you're walking underwater like and you're not able to function, that is your sign, friend. That is the sign
Mhm.
to say, okay, just like if you had a sore throat or a fever, you would say, okay, I have these symptoms. I better get this
Mhm.
checked out. Those are your signs to say, okay, I have these symptoms. I need to
Mhm.
get checked out. And there's no shame in that.
Or for my kids, like that maybe they're having difficulty functioning. And so bring them
Yes.
to the pediatrician and like just have a conversation with the doctor and like what can parents say? Because sometimes I think we just don't even have the language of like, I don't even know what's happening here. It's just something's not right.
And you know what? That's perfectly fine language. We know what that means as pediatric healthcare professionals. But think back to when your kids were babies and they were up all night crying and holding their ear. You have no hesitation walking in and saying, hey, I just want you to check their ears. Just make sure it's okay. Maybe it's fine. I just want to know. And then we say, yeah, it's fine. And you say, okay, good. Or we say, no, it's not fine. Here's a prescription. And you say, oh, okay, good. We need to take that same attitude with mental health and come in and say, something seems off. I have some concerns about anxiety. Can you just check and just make sure it's okay? We can absolutely do that. We have survey tools that are validated, that we have been used on millions of kids, that give us a good understanding of, okay, you know what? You're falling on the normal spectrum for anxiety, what you would expect after experiencing something like this. Or, you know what? I'm really concerned. The survey tells us this may go a little bit deeper. Let's investigate our options. A lot of parents are really afraid because of stigma. They don't want their kid to be perceived as
Mhm.
weak or labeled, or they don't want to, feel like they failed as a parent in helping their kid
Mhm.
cope. But you wouldn't feel that way if your kid had a fever or a sore throat. And so we just
Mhm.
need to own that every kid's brain is different. They're all going to respond to trauma differently, and some need help to process that. And the most common help that is needed is just therapy. So, talking to a school counselor, talking to a licensed clinical social workers do a lot of
Mhm.
counseling, or talking to a counselor
Mhm.
or a psychologist. Most of the time, that is going to be enough to be able to do some
Mm.
cognitive processing to be able to deal with what you've experienced.
I love that. And I think just giving our kids other safe places to talk,
Yes.
like I think just having other safe people around, just building that connection, I feel like is so helpful. I love the simplicity of just taking them to the doctor. Are there other ways that we can be proactive and engaged with our kids' mental health? I think this is a relevant conversation, just in light of the world that we live in today, not just only the shootings that are happening.
A lot of kids that I see, they're worried about their own mental health and they truly don't know. Like, do I
Yeah.
have anxiety or do I not? Like, is this normal? Is this just how life is supposed to be? Or is this not? So the first thing that I would say to parents about engaging in kids with mental health is watch what you say about
Mm.
other people. So when you're talking about mental health and you say something that you don't intend to be derogatory, but somebody says, "Oh, they're going to therapy." "Oh, really? Why are they going to therapy for that?" Like,
Mhm.
oh, they're on medication? Oh, that's concerning. We say these things in just
Mhm.
casual conversation, but our kids keep a treasure trove of that information
They're building a
for
file
reference.
folder to go to.
Yes. To say, "This is what my parent would say about me."
Mhm.
So that's really important. And the other thing is just I check in frequently with my kids about mental health. We have totally normalized that. And so I'll tell them on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being I am absolutely terrible and non-functional, and 10 being I feel great. How's your mental health? And now all I'll have to say to my kids is, "What's your number?" And they'll tell me 3, and I'm like, "Okay, all right, we need to have a talk." And
Mhm.
if they say 8, I'm like, "Okay, all right, you're doing okay today. Let's just keep
Mhm.
on going." So I think just any way that you can normalize conversation about that and then reflect back your own processing. If you're irritable, just say, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit anxious today about whatever happened. Maybe that's something on the news. Or, I have a tense relationship with my mom and I had a conversation this morning. I've been a little irritable about that. I'm sorry. Just processing that with them helps normalize those mental health symptoms and helps them to know what are you doing to cope, and they'll adopt those behaviors as well. So
Mhm.
that's a double-edged sword for sure. So we need to make sure that we're adopting healthy coping behaviors.
Well, it's giving them a model and
Yeah,
giving them language. Because again, even teens don't always have the language to
right.
articulate how they're feeling. And I don't know about you, but I have a lot of clients who are like, I just watched this TikTok video and now I think I have OCD or
Yes.
ADHD. And so they're getting information. And I think that we don't all have to be trained professionals to be able to have conversations with our kids and helping to be the informer on what's going on.
Right. And you bring up a really important point, Melissa, because there is a lot of conversation about mental health going on TikTok. And there is a lot of it that is really not good. So, I worry about the kids who just get on there and don't realize the gravity of their words, showing unhealthy coping behaviors. I'll give you an example. One of them I was looking at was talking about self harm. And so a girl was saying, well, instead of self harm, just put on a rubber band with some red food dye and you can get the same satisfaction. And I'm thinking, this is what our kids are watching,
Mm,
and they believe everything that they see that comes across social media. It's
mhm.
very difficult for them to evaluate credibility of sources. So it's important for us to set a good example for them too, saying, okay, you want to follow someone on TikTok? Let's look up their credentials. Let's see, where if they are practicing, are they licensed? Those kinds of things are really, really helpful in having that open conversation.
Yeah, that's a really great point of checking in to see what are they consuming,
Right.
helping them filter. Like, I don't know about you, but I try to like buy all organic food and making sure that the things I bring into the home are good things for them to consume, but they're consuming so much online. And a lot of times we just
Totally.
like give our kids, out there, just, have at it. And there's no filtering process as far as like what are they consuming that's good for them or harmful for them. That's a really great conversation to have. What are ways that as parents we can help our kids to feel safe in school? So you mentioned your son having a bulletproof backpack. Did he get that backpack or like I'm
He didn't actually.
okay.
As we talked through it, I think it was just helpful to him to know that he could if he
Yeah.
wanted to, and ultimately he decided, no, that was too much money. And, but he really thought through all of those things. And I think that that was just a helpful process for him to do that. And again, every kid is different. That's why I say you need to ask them, what can I do to help you feel safe at school?
Hmm.
And some kids will say, you know what, I want to talk to my teacher, or I want you to come and see this, or I don't want to be part of the lockdown drills, whatever that
Mm,
is, you need to individualize that plan and do what you can to help, because a lot of times their requests are reasonable. And so just knowing that you're there, maybe it's that, they want to have their cell phone on them. That may be something that you need to talk to the school about for a time and say, my child is really struggling with what's happened. I know the rules are not to have a cell phone. Would you make an exception for this week? Can we talk about that? Or even talk about the rules that surround that? What is the best practice? But the most important thing is for us not to assume what will make our kids feel safe, because that's really what's going to make us feel safe. We need to know what is going to make them feel safe.
yeah, and we could do a both and process.
Yes.
We can
Yes.
we can mitigate our own fears, but we also need to create space for our kids to have their fears and not to say, "Oh, that's a silly thing to worry about," or
Right.
nothing we can do about it, blah blah blah, like giving them space to empower them. I know one thing that we did was to actually like talk to our school as far as like what are the safety procedures?
Right.
What are y'all doing? Are y'all changing anything? And it doesn't like lower every fear, but it does help us to know that is one thing that we can do. So I think to
Yes.
have that open conversation with administration, especially if they aren't sending out letters to talk about like what's happening, I think is a really wise thing to do.
And, I think having direct conversations, if you have a school resource officer, maybe it would be helpful for your child to have that conversation and they can tell you all of the things that they're doing. And just knowing that friendly face that, oh, that's who's here to protect me, and having that, personal connection, that can be a helpful strategy. It just depends, again, on, like you said, what is your school doing? You can find out from administration, sit down and review those things and say, your school really cares about you. Here are all the things that they're doing to help keep you safe. That can
Mhm.
be reassuring. But all of this just happens really in the context of ongoing dialogue and just that constant message of, I'm here, you're not alone. I'm with you. That is so powerful.
This is so good. Are there any other like tips that you want to leave a parent with who wants to help their kids to feel safe and healthy and just dealing with all the things?
One thing that we have not talked about, which I know we talked about before, Melissa, is our own consumption of media when this
Yeah.
happens. When there is a car accident, like a proverbial one, like we rubberneck, right? We cannot look away. It's like a train crash, like you just are compelled to look. But we know from research that excessive media consumption on these is not healthy. And when our kids see those visual images, in particular on the news, they are burned on their brains. So
Mm,
we really need to limit our consumption. So I would advise you, know in advance what news source you're going to that's trusted, whether that's, a national news source that you want to just update yourself, or a local news source that you would just go to get the facts of what is needed. And once you know the story, turn it off. It really isn't helpful to have that playing in the background. The other thing that I think as parents we do is that, if you have another parent in the home or another adult that lives in the home with you, we tend to process our feelings and emotions and have conversation over our kids instead of with our kids. And we don't pay attention to how much they're actually listening to us. So we need to make sure that we're just monitoring the amount of conversation that we're having. Maybe what I would say to my husband is not what I'd say to my kid, but I said it to my husband in front of my kid, not thinking about that. So I think that's a discipline that we have to have and model that for our kids. Say, you know what, we know what's happened now. Let's turn off the media and then do whatever you do as a family, whether that's gathering for a prayer time, maybe together, or having a conversation time together, doing something fun. I think we have to not underestimate the power of that. And maybe it's, you don't feel like it at first, but enjoy the blessing of being alive and say, this gives us appreciation for every day. Let's go on a
mhm.
walk. Let's have a family game night. Let's go bowling. Like, let's do something, totally silly. And I think that's another coping skill that can really help build resilience.
So good. That really resonates what you said about the news. And I know one thing that we do is like we don't have the news on in our house. We just like look at it on our computers on our own and having those conversations. I just feel like the news just is typically like a very like negative space. And I believe in being informed and talking to our kids about current events. But I think for us as parents to be the gatekeeper of that information is really helpful, especially with our younger kids.
Yes.
And that's a great suggestion as far as like just keeping up with the routines and building in fun because our kids need that. It's interesting. You can probably speak to this better than I can, but when kids are grieving, they grieve only what's right in front of them. So when they have those fun moments, it like literally is completely out of their mind and they're able to be 100% present with you. Can you add to that just from a clinical perspective?
Sure, because developmentally, every kid is going to respond a little bit differently to grief, but especially the younger they are, they don't have the capacity to really think that far in the future, and they only think what's in front of them today. And so, just again, thinking from the terms of stopping that chemical reaction of stress. That's what you're trying to do. So, if you can imagine like turning off the faucet so that stress chemicals are not bathing their brain, that's what you're doing by injecting fun into their day. And so sometimes, we feel sober and we feel really sad when these things happen. But we really need to remember that our kids, the ones that are in our house, are the ones that we're responsible for. And it's a great reminder just to embrace the gift of life that is every day and say, let's go make some memories. Let's be silly. Let's have some fun. Let's enjoy ourselves today. And there is a time for grieving. There is a time to be sober, but we really need to model to our kids that we take time to process that. We have time for that, but we also have time for fun.
It's good for parents too, not just the kids. We can get
Yes.
so caught up in the seriousness of life that we forget what a gift is of today. This has been super helpful and so good. Where can we find you? Because you have really good content on your Instagram page, I know.
Oh, thank you. I feel like I'm 107 on Instagram, but my teenagers help me, so that's really helpful. You can find me at drnursemama.com. That's drnursemama.com. That's the same for Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find my podcast linked at my website. I would love to connect with you. And so I'm walking this journey with you. My mission is to give hope for healthy relationships and families.
So good. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Melissa.